The Batman is finally here, and people are pretty excited, which is kind of odd if you think about it. After all, it's not like we've been starved of big screen Batman over the years. It's only been a decade since the last solo adventure, and Ben Affleck has been keeping the flame alive in the meantime. In fact, if you look back at all the cinematic Batmans, you'll find a version to suit just about every taste. So grab your utility belts and let's see how the caped Crusader, his friends, and his enemies have evolved over the years. Let's start with the world's greatest detective himself. Since 1966, we've had 7 different live-action incarnations of Bruce Wayne and his rubber-suited alter ego. We're not even counting the animated versions. Yeah, that's a whole other video. Adam West's version, way back in the swinging psychedelic 60s, was towards the wackier end of the spectrum. But the great thing about the late Mr. West was his ability to infuse even the silliest antics with a kind of knowing gravitas, even when he was pulling out shark-repellent bat spray, or running around trying to get rid of a comically oversized bomb. He played the whole thing pretty straight. Like the great Leslie Nielsen, West instinctively knew that ridiculous dialogue is almost always funnier if you deliver it as if it's meant to be serious. Speaking of serious, the modern cinematic Batman canon really starts with Tim Burton's Batman in 1989. Michael Keaton was mostly known for comedy when he accepted the role, and fans were initially suspicious of his casting, but he proved everybody wrong with his weird, wired take on the legendary hero. He was followed by Val Kilmer in 1995's Batman Forever, who emphasized the duality of the character, even having Batman and Bruce Wayne compete for the affections of Nicole Kidman's Dr. Chase Meridian. And probably the less said about 1997's Batman and Robin, the better. George Clooney kind of tried the Adam West tactic of being the calm, straight man in the middle of a festival of camp excess. But unfortunately, that camp excess was so damn camp and excessive that Batman ended up fading into the background of his own movie. Then came the 21st century, and the era of really serious Batman truly began. Christian Bale gave us an intense, nuanced take on the character, with more of a focus on Bruce Wayne and the psychological impact of being Gotham's protector. And Ben Affleck took this further, with a grizzled Frank Miller-inspired older Batman who needed to rediscover his moral compass. And now, we have Robert Pattinson. Is he the darkest? Is he the most intense? He just might be. But whether you dig that or not, you gotta admit, at least his Batman voice doesn't sound as silly as Christian Bale's. In keeping with the grim and gritty nature of the Batman, writer-director Matt Reeves brings us a take on the Riddler who owes more to movies like Seven and Zodiac than he does to the funny pages. Paul Dano plays the character as a wild-eyed psychopath, a truly broken individual leaving a grisly trail for Batman to follow. He is kind of theatrical, but in the way that a modern tech-savvy terrorist group is theatrical, as opposed to the, grandstanding pantomime behavior of your average supervillain. And speaking of the grandstanding pantomime behavior of your average supervillain, we can't talk about Dano's Riddler without talking about Jim Carrey's Riddler, which of course is from the aforementioned Batman Forever. To say the two interpretations are different is an understatement. Apart from the name and a fondness for puzzles, they share basically nothing in common. Carrey played the Riddler as a hyperactive extrovert, a grinning, cackling lunatic in a glittery unitard, dancing around throwing branded bombs. Carrey's take is actually a lot closer to the way that Frank Gorshin played the character back in the 1960s, with an emphasis on the playful, colorful aspects of the character. Of course, in the comics, we've seen many different variations of the Riddler, from light and funny to dark and scary, so it's only natural that we should see a variety of different tones on the big screen too. We do kinda want to see Dano in one of those unitards though. Hey, maybe he could do it for charity, Every cinematic version of Catwoman, it has to be said, exists in the shadow of Michelle Pfeiffer. That iconic latex costume, her unhinged, hissing performance, the way she literally licks Batman's face. Seriously, Batman Returns was wild, man. If you haven't seen it, yeah, you should go and watch that immediately. There's also her slightly wacky origin, which you could only really get away with in a Tim Burton movie. Falling out of a window and then getting licked back to life by cats? Yeah, sure, Tim. Nobody else would ever try anything like that. It would be ridiculous. Sensibly, the modern big screen interpretations of the character haven't really tried to top the Pfeiffer version, opting for a more realistic approach. Anne Hathaway played Selena Kyle as kind of an anti-hero, raging against the class disparity and inequalities of a very realistic Gotham City. And in the new movie, Zoe Kravitz gives us the most grounded version we've seen yet, a troubled and traumatized survivor looking for revenge. She does have a cat though, so that's something. Of course, we're all excited to see whether Kravitz will return in a potential sequel. Her chemistry with Pattinson is nearly as good as Keaton and Pfeiffer's, but we have to admit, we would like to see a big screen Catwoman more in the spirit of the elegant, preening 1960s version. I mean, there's a reason that Eartha Kitt's iconic, you know? Oh, and before you ask, no, we're not talking about the Halle Berry version. We simply refuse, and you cannot make us. We've had 2 big screen versions of Oswald Cobblepot, aka the Penguin, an unrecognizable Colin Farrell in The Batman, and Danny DeVito's take from Batman Returns, which frankly has to be seen to be believed. Seriously, did we say that Batman Returns is wild? Cause Batman Returns is wild. This guy's crazy. And while the 2 takes are very different, there are also some interesting similarities. Both Farrell and DeVito give what you might call big performances, chewing every available morsel of scenery, and then somehow finding extra scenery to chew when they're done. They both wear heavy prosthetics, though you can at least recognize Danny DeVito under his makeup. They both very nearly steal the show from their co-stars. And yeah, that's about it. Colin Farrell's Penguin may be over the top, but he still exists in a recognizably real world. He has ties to the mob, he runs a club. There's nothing supernatural about him. DeVito's Penguin, on the other hand? Well, as a baby, he attacked his parents' cat, and they were so disgusted that they threw him into the sewers. He was then raised by penguins, eventually joining a traveling circus. Oh, and as an adult, he ran for the mayor of Gotham. Like we said, the movie's wild. Oh, and he sometimes bites people's noses off. Hard to imagine Colin Farrell doing that. Well, we guess there's always that forthcoming spin-off show. Of course, we were always going to get this guy, weren't we? The Joker is, without a doubt, the iconic Batman bad guy. Like Lex Luthor for Superman, the Green Goblin for Spider-Man, and Skeletor for He-Man. He's the villain that defines the hero, and vice versa, in ways that nobody else can match. And it's fair to say that we've been spoiled for cinematic takes on the character over the years. Jack Nicholson's interpretation from the 1989 Batman naturally cast a long shadow, taking his cue from Cesar Romero's 1960s performance, albeit with the homicidal tendencies dialed way, way up. Nicholson was over the top in all the right ways, to the extent that he nearly walked off with the movie. He certainly got paid more than Keaton. He even got top billing over actual Batman. Surely nobody was gonna ever top that version of the Clown Prince of Crime, right? And then came Heath Ledger. The late great actor arguably perfected the character of the Joker with his terrifying, nihilistic, almost punk interpretation. Face horribly scarred, pockets full of knives and lint. In fact, you could say that Ledger perfected cinematic Batman villains, period, with everybody else still playing catch-up. Certainly when Jared Leto took on the role for Suicide Squad in 2016, his overly mannered, pseudo-gangster take couldn't help but feel like a watered-down version of Ledger's performance. It is a brave actor who takes on the man who laughs in a post-Dark Knight world. Or perhaps a foolish one. So yeah, good luck, Barry Keoghan. We don't envy you. If your first exposure to the character of Bane was the version played by Jeep Swenson back in 1997's Batman and Robin, you were not getting exactly a faithful interpretation. Sure, he looked right, huge and heavily muscled with that instantly recognizable mask and venom pumping through his veins, but the Bane of the comics wasn't just the mask and the muscles. He was also a strategic mastermind, one of the most cunning villains the caped Crusader ever faced. Hey, it's not everyone who can reduce Gotham to chaos as part of a complex scheme to wear down the Batman, then add injury to insult by breaking his back, but Swenson's take was basically a grunting caveman, a brainless henchman who could just about say his own name. Tom Hardy's take in 2012's The Dark Knight Rises was a lot closer to the comics version. He could actually talk, for one thing, although it wasn't always easy to understand what he was saying, but he also combined fearsome brute strength with a fearsome intellect. Born in the dark, rising out of the shadows to deliver Gotham's reckoning.
Don't ever do that again.
Oh, and hey, Bane broke Batman's back, so, that's something to tick off the bucket list. Back in 1995, when Tommy Lee Jones was brought in to play Two-Face opposite Jim Carrey's Riddler, it was, well, kind of a mess, to put it mildly. Tommy Lee Jones is, of course, one of our finest actors. He was just coming off an Academy Award for his fantastic role in The Fugitive. He'd played a slightly hyperactive villain to great effect in the very underrated Under Siege. Sure, why not cast him as a Batman villain? You can see the logic. The problem was, he clearly felt that Jack Nicholson had been too restrained as the Joker, so he decided to go even bigger. The result is the kind of hammy performance, shouty and one note. It would have been difficult to take on its own, but opposite Jim Carrey's equally hammy Riddler? Oh man, it's almost unbearable. It's pretty amusing to compare the Tommy Lee Jones Two-Face to Aaron Eckhart's take in The Dark Knight. We get a brief origin story for Two-Face and Batman Forever, but it doesn't really have any bearing on the action. But Aaron Eckhart spends more time as Harvey Dent than he does as his villainous alter ego. It's a much more tragic take on the character. Gotham's White Knight brought low by his own hubris and the actions of the Joker. He doesn't cackle. He doesn't make any puns. He doesn't get special suits made that are one color on one side and another color on the other side. He just flips a coin, and if it lands on the wrong side, you die. Where would Batman be without his loyal butler Alfred? Probably in the morgue, or at least laid up in traction in one of Gotham's finest private hospitals. Without a faithful assistant to tend to his wounds, bring him his meals, and deliver the occasional pep talk, Batman's war on crime wouldn't have lasted very long. So it's kind of fitting that Batman's unwavering companion has remained basically unchanged over the years. He's loyal, he's endlessly supportive of his boss's frankly irresponsible schemes, and he's English. Of course, each actor brings some subtle nuances to the character, but the fundamentals of Alfred never really change. In fact, if you look at the evolution of the character, from Michael Gough through Michael Caine and Jeremy Irons all the way back to Andy Serkis in The Batman, some of them are really old, some are kind of old, and some are less old. Can I interest you in a teen Alfred, huh? Robot Alfred, maybe? Ooh, I got it. Bat Alfred, huh? By the way, if you support Bat Alfred, comment section, please. Oh, but he's gotta stay English, so English Bat Alfred. James Gordon, the last good cop in Gotham, a noble crusader for law, order, and justice, often Batman's only ally on the streets. The last three iterations of this stalwart figure in the Batman mythos have all been fairly similar variations on this type. Jeffrey Wright dials up the world wariness for the Batman. Gary Oldman gave the character a fairly compelling arc across Nolan's trilogy, tarnishing his soul with a devil's bargain. J.K. Simmons arguably got less of an opportunity to put his stamp on the character, but he certainly managed to communicate the noble and the tired. And then there's Pat Hingle, from 1989's Batman all the way through to Batman and Robin in 1997. The veteran actor played Commissioner Gordon as, well, a complete buffoon. He was great, don't misunderstand us, but he was a buffoon. Although we did enjoy how, by the time you get to Batman and Robin, he just calls Batman up to say, hey, there's a new villain in town. He's called Mr. Freeze. Please, can you deal with him? Okay, thanks, bye. I don't blame him either. Hey, Batman gets results. Why not just defer to him? How do you solve a problem like the Boy Wonder? Of all the iconic Batman characters, it's kind of strange that since 1966, we've only had two real attempts to depict Robin, aka Dick Grayson, the Dark Knight's ward. Back in the 1960s, it was Burt Ward. Hey, Batman's ward, Burt Ward. Burt Ward was basically there to ask questions and say, holy this and holy that. Then in the 1990s, we got Chris O'Donnell. And not meaning any disrespect to the guy, but his take is not fondly remembered. He spent a whole lot of time whining, complaining, disobeying orders, getting into scraps, and generally being a pain in everybody's ass. And since then, nothing. Of course, we found out that Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character in The Dark Knight Rises had the middle name Robin, and there was a suggestion that he could potentially take over from Batman, but that was more of a sly Easter egg for fans than anything else. And in the Ben Affleck continuity, they make a point of telling us that Robin is well and truly dead. It's like nobody really knows what to do with the character of a young orphan circus performer who assists a brooding adult superhero while wearing green tights. Come on, Matt Reeves. Anyone can turn the Riddler into a super modern supervillain, but updating Robin? That's a real challenge for a real A-list filmmaker.
I got you! I got you!
Of course, there's one iconic piece of the Batman mythos that the new movie completely fails to show us, and that is the death of Bruce Wayne's parents. Come on, we've only seen them die like what, a dozen times? If you count animated movies and TV, of course. What's one more?